The United States in World War II. America turns the tide. Section 1. Mobilizing for defense. After Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, they thought America would avoid further conflict with them. The Japan Times newspaper said America was trembling in their shoes. But if America was trembling, it was with rage, not fear. Remember Pearl Harbor was the rallying cry as America entered World War II. Americans rushed to enlist. After Pearl Harbor, 5 million Americans enlisted to fight in the war. Women joined the fight. Army Chief of Staff General George Marshall pushed for the formation of the Women's Auxiliary Army Corps. Under this program, women worked in non-combat roles such as nurses, ambulances, drivers, radio operators, and pilots. All Americans fought. Despite discrimination at home, minority populations contributed to the war effort. A production miracle. Americans converted their auto industry into a war industry. The nation's automobile plants began to produce tanks, planes, boats, and command cars. Laborers' contribution. By 1944, nearly 18 million workers were laboring in war industries. More than 6 million of these were women and nearly 2 million were minority. Mobilization of scientists. In 1941, FDR created the Office of Scientific Research and Development to bring scientists into the war effort. Focus was on radar and sonar to locate submarines. Also, the scientist works on penicillin and pesticides like DDT. Manhattan Project. The most important achievement of the OSRD was the secret development of the atomic bomb. Einstein wrote to FDR warning him that the Germans were attempting to develop such a weapon. The code used to describe American efforts to build this bomb was called the Manhattan Project. Federal government takes control of inflation. With prices of goods threatening to rise out of control, FDR responded by creating the Office of Price Administration. Yearly inflation rate. War Production Board. To ensure the troops had ample resources, FDR created the WPB. The WPB decided which companies would convert to wartime production and how to best allocate raw materials to those industries. Collection drives. The WPB also organized nationwide drives to collect scrap, iron, tins, cans, paper, rags, and cooking fat for recycling. Do with less, so they'll have enough. Rationing gives you your fair share. Everyone contributed to the war effort on the American home front when it came to rationing. World War II poster encouraging conservation. When you ride alone, you ride with Hitler. Join a car-sharing club today. Ration stamps for World War II from Book 4 left and Book 3 right. Section 2. The War for Europe and North Africa. Days after Pearl Harbor, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill arrived at the White House and spent 3 weeks working out war plans with FDR. They decided to focus on defeating Hitler first and then turn their attention to Japan. The Battle of the Atlantic. The power of the German submarines was great, and in 2 months' time, almost 2 million tons of Allied ships were resting on the ocean floor. Efforts were soon made to restrict German subs' activities. The Battle of the Atlantic was a dominating factor all through the war. Winston Churchill. Battle of the Atlantic. Allies control U-boats. In the first 7 months of 1942, German U-boats sank 681 Allied ships in the Atlantic. Something had to be done or the war at sea would be lost. First, Allies used convoys of ships and airplanes to transport supplies. Destroyers used sonar to track U-boats. Airplanes were used to track the U-boat's ocean surfaces. This is a map of the Battle of the Atlantic. The Eastern Front of the Mediterranean. Hitler wanted to wipe out Stalingrad, a major industrial center. In the summer of 1942, the Germans took the offensive in the southern Soviet Union. By the winter of 1943, the Allies began to see victories on land as well as sea. The first great turning point was the Battle of Stalingrad. Battle of Stalingrad. For weeks, the Germans pressed in on Stalingrad. Then winter set in and the Germans were wearing summer uniforms. The Germans surrendered in January 1943. The North African Front. Operation Torch, an invasion of Axis-controlled North Africa, was launched by American General Dwight D. Eisenhower in 1942. Allied troops landed in Casablanca, Oran, and the Algiers in Algeria. They sped eastward chasing the Afrika Korps led by German General Edwin Rommel. Allied troops landed in Casablanca and the Algiers. Casablanca meeting. FDR and Churchill met in Casablanca and decided their next moves. 1. Plan amphibious invasions of France and Italy. 2. Only unconditional surrender would be accepted. Italian campaign. Another Allied victory. The Italian campaign got off to a good start as the Allies easily took Sicily. At that point, King Emmanuel III stripped Mussolini of his power and had him arrested. However, Hitler's forces continued to resist the Allies in Italy. Heated battles ensued. It wasn't until 1945 that Italy was secured by the Allies. Tuskegee Airmen. Among the brave men who fought in Italy were pilots of all-black 99th Squadron. The Tuskegee Airmen. The pilots made numerous effective strikes against Germany and won 2 distinguishing unit citations. On May 1943, the 99th Squadron, the first group of African American pilots trained at the Tuskegee Institute, arrived in North Africa. Allies liberate Europe. Even as the Allies were battling for Italy, they began plans on a dramatic invasion of France. It was known as Operation Overlord, and the commander was American General Dwight D. Eisenhower. Also called D-Day, the operation involved 3 million U.S. and British troops and was set for June 6, 1944. D-Day. D-Day was the largest land, sea, air operation in military history. Despite air support, German retaliation was brutal, especially at Omaha Beach. Within a month, the Allies had launched 1 million troops, 567,000 tons of supplies, and 170,000 vehicles. D-Day was an amphibious landing, soldiers going from sea to land. Omaha Beach, 6/6/1944. Landing at Normandy. The planes at Normandy. Planes dropped paratroopers behind enemy lines at Normandy, France. Losses were extremely heavy on D-Day. France freed. By September 1944, the Allies had freed France, Belgium, and Luxembourg. That good news and the Americans' people's desire not to change horses in the midstream helped elect FDR to an unprecedented 4th term. Battle of the Bulge. In October 1944, Americans captured their first German town. The Allies were closing in. Hitler responded with one last-ditch massive offensive. Hitler hoped breaking through the Allied line would break up Allied supplies. Battle of the Bulge continued. The battle raged for a month. The Germans had been pushed back. Little seemed to have changed, but in fact, the Germans had sustained heavy losses. Germany lost 120,000 troops, 600 tanks, and 1,600 planes. From that point on, the Nazis could do little but retreat. Liberation of death camps. While the British and Americans moved westward into Germany, the Soviets moved eastward into German-controlled Poland. The Soviets discovered many death camps that the Germans had set up within Poland. The Americans also liberated Nazi death camps within Germany. The liberation of Nazi death camps. Allies take Berlin. Hitler commits suicide. By April 25, 1945, the Soviet army had stormed Berlin. In this underground headquarters in Berlin, Hitler prepared for the end. On April 29th, he married his longtime girlfriend, Eva Braun, then wrote a last note in which he blamed the Jews for starting the war and his generals for losing it. The next, he gave the poison to his wife and shot himself. VE Day. General Eisenhower accepted the unconditional surrender of the Third Reich. On May 8, 1945, the Allies celebrated VE Day victory in Europe Day. The war in Europe was finally over. Famous picture of an American soldier celebrating the end of the war. FDR dies, Truman's president. President Roosevelt did not live to see VE Day. On April 12, 1945, he suffered a stroke and died. His VP, Harry S. Truman, became the nation's 33rd president. Nation mourns Roosevelt. Truman becomes president. The War in the Pacific. The Americans did not celebrate long, as Japan was busy conquering an empire that dwarfed Hitler's Third Reich. Battle of the Coral Sea. The Battle of Midway. Japan's next thrust was toward Midway Island, a strategic island northwest of Hawaii. The Battle of Midway was the turning point in the war. Soon, the Allies were island hopping toward Japan. Kamikaze pilots attack Allies. The Americans continue leapfrogging across the Pacific toward Japan. Japanese encountered by employing a new tactic, kamikaze attacks. Iwo Jima. American soldiers plant the flag on the island of Iwo Jima after their victory. The Battle of Okinawa. In April 1945, U.S. Marines invaded Okinawa. The Japanese unleashed 1,900 kamikaze attacks, sinking 30 ships and killing 5,000 seamen. Okinawa cost the Americans 7,600 Marines and the Japanese 110,000 soldiers. Invade Japan. After Okinawa, MacArthur predicted that the Normandy-type amphibious invasion of Japan would result in 1,500,000 Allied deaths. Atomic bomb developed. Japan had little army that would defend every inch of the Japanese mainland. Japan had a huge army that would defend every inch of the Japanese mainland. U.S. drops 2 atomic bombs. Truman warned Japan in late July 1945 that without immediate Japanese surrender, it faced prompt and utter destruction. On August 6, Hiroshima, and August 9th, Nagasaki. A B-29 bomber dropped atomic bombs on Japan. Hiroshima, August 6, 1945. Nagasaki, August 9, 1945. Japan surrenders. The Yalta Conference. In February 1945, the Allies pushed toward victory in Europe. An ailing FDR met with Winston Churchill and Stalin at the Black Sea resort of Yalta in the USSR. A series of compromises were worked out concerning post-war Europe. Yalta Agreements. They agreed to divide Germany into 4 occupied zones after the war. Stalin agreed to free elections in Eastern Europe. Stalin agreed to help the U.S. in the war against Japan and to join the United Nations. Nuremberg Trials. The discovery of Hitler's death camps led the Allies to put 24 surviving Nazi leaders on trial for crimes against humanity, crimes against the peace, and war crimes. The trials were held in Nuremberg, Germany. I was only following orders was not an acceptable defense, as 12 of the 24 were sentenced to death and the others to life in prison. The occupation of Japan. Women make gains. Population shifts. The war triggered the greatest mass migration in American history. GI Bill helps returning vets. To help returning servicemen ease back into civilian life, Congress passed the Servicemen Readjustment Act, GI Bill of Rights. Internment of Japanese Americans. Japanese Americans were sent to internment camps because of the distrust Americans faced after the attack of Pearl Harbor. U.S. pays reparation to Japanese. In the late 1980s, President Reagan signed into law a bill that provided $20,000 to every Japanese American sent to the relocation camp. Nearly 59 years after the end of World War II, the National World War II Memorial was dedicated in Washington, D.C. on Saturday, May 29, 2004, to honor the 408,680 Americans who died in the conflict.